Thanks everyone for kind of tuning in. I'm going to be speaking on the state of virtual design sprints today. I'll recommend that anyone, if you have any questions or if you want to let anyone know, or basically let us know if you have a thought or a perspective you'd like to share, please put that in the chat as we're kind of going through things. I think I'll start off with like a little bit of background about myself, since this may be the first time that you've ever encountered me and what I'm all about. So I'm in the design thinking, prototyping, micro experiments kind of space right now. And with virtual design sprints, I use that as a method to test ideas before you go down the path of doing 3 to 6 month endeavors to get your work done. I went virtual before even the pandemic started, meaning that I encourage people to use this methodology to test big ideas with target customers. Even before we were all kind of regulated to watching each other through a screen. And if you're not familiar with design sprints, a quick kind of intro to that is that it started with Jake Knapp and Richard Banfield about maybe over a decade ago. And the whole notion is that you can use design thinking to get a big idea, concept, a challenge of some type that you have in your enterprise or in your team, and basically work through in a series of steps, so that at the end of the week, you would have a testable prototype. You would have 5 target users that fit who you wanted to kind of show this to and who you wanted to react to. And at the end, you would get feedback that would go back to your stakeholders, go back to the team, and you can make some value judgments on which direction to go after you had gotten done with the process. On the virtual side of things, it's basically the same thing, only you take advantage of the technology. You can record everything. You don't have to be in front of a monitor the entire time. You can spend part of your time offline as well as online. We tend to call it asynchronous versus synchronous communication and collaboration. And we've modified and advanced the practice so much that it doesn't look quite like the original design sprint, and I think say hardly at all. We've integrated some kind of market exploration exercises in the very beginning to see if what you were thinking about in terms of an idea, a product or service really has any desirability in the market. And you can do that fairly quickly using fast, cheap, and believable experiments to run those through. So what I'm going to be talking with Scott today in this fireside chat is where virtual design sprints are right now, where I kind of see them going into 2021 and how the practice is going to change. And I'm more than happy to ask any questions that deal with, well, what the heck are you talking about with design sprints, or how does this apply to me? I'm perfectly fine with all spectrums of questions in this because I usually do this a lot with my coaching, with kind of collaborating with different companies that are trying to set up their own shop or to optimize what they already have. So where should we go from here, Scott?
Sure. Great setup. Appreciate it. And, I guess maybe one place to start is where have you seen adoption of these methods? How have you seen the adoption of these methods change over the last few years? You said there were some changes going on.
Originally, it was a lot of agencies going out to companies and small businesses saying, hey, here's this design sprint process that will really speed up all of your internal project work and your product development life cycles fairly quickly, going from 6 to 3 months down to just a week or 2 weeks with some build time after that. And as it's been evolving, and what I've been seeing last year and also this year, is that this process has pretty much been consumed by the design thinking zeitgeist. So you have teams that have already known what it's about, have bought the sprint book, have looked into different things related to the process. And they've said, okay, well, we like this. This doesn't really work with us. And you've seen this sort of adoption of different dimensions of the process that work with the internal design houses. And then people turn around and personalize it for their own purposes, for their own skill sets. So to answer your question, right now, the process is modular and completely customizable, and it should be like that. The more advanced people that I see doing design sprints do kind of take in things like prototyping and mix it up with design sprints to optimize both your cost and your time with your project team to get to certainty around a particular direction. I've seen people venture into strategy and growth design with design sprints, but just take certain aspects of it and mix it in with some of the things you see with growth hacking, with optimization and analytics. Strategy is also a space that's fertile for you kind of using the approaches of design sprints to kind of quickly get to some sort of level bar around where everyone wants to kind of project into the year, whether it's fiscal or it's like what's going to be coming down the R&D pipe. So really right now, the state of virtual design sprints is that they're all over the map. But what it speaks to is the versatility of the original process, but having a real recognition that where we are today is you can take what's in the Blue Book, Jake Knapp's book, you can take what's in Richard Banfield's book, you can see what's online, and you can just completely change it and modify it for what you need in your own space.
So it sounds like there are many variations on the theme, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And I encourage it, because if nothing else, I learned from that perspective, especially if people don't value certain aspects of the original design sprint process. Like, say, a lot of people will tell me that the prototyping part of it really can't be done effectively in 24 hours, especially if it's more of a dev-centric shop. So they've done something called like a dev sprint, so to speak, where in a course of a week, they not only write production-ready code, but they also have testing scripts that go along with it. And they marry that to an agile framework so that they target the highest value feature or highest value component of, say, an enterprise sprint. And they use the sprint process that first week to kind of iterate, test what they're thinking about through those testing scripts. And then when they present in their ceremonies the following week to kind of go through the demo, it's literally taking all the downstream data dependencies that go along with the prototype and gives everyone at the table a chance to see how it would actually work, not projected, but actually work within their particular production environment, or even the pre-production if you want to go, if people are very concerned about security and what have you. So yeah, it takes on it's taken on a life of its own. And every time I run into someone that says, oh yeah, we do design sprints and we do it like X, that's what piques my interest, because I'd like to see how their approach differs from what I've experienced. And then that way I learn a lot more about how people kind of approach process.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned that the virtual design sprint doesn't look like the traditional design sprint anymore. I was going to ask you to elaborate on that. I think you just did a little bit, but is there anything else you'd add about some, recent developments that have changed the way this looks?
Well, I think there's a recognition that just doing a little bit of research before you go into a design sprint process doesn't give you doesn't optimize the results you might have at the end. Because to really understand an audience, their context, an environment, a situation that you're going to try to solution for, you can always get third-party understandings of like demographics or locality, or even like jobs to be done if you want to go down that route. But ultimately, it goes into a higher level of immersion around who you're going to serve and what that process is going to solve for them, and what challenges you're really taking on. Are you solving for the right problem? Previously, it was in the realm of problem framing, where people would take a number of design thinking exercises and kind of explore a problem in a really involved and discrete manner. But ultimately, it was like a lot of opinions were at the table, kind of telling what they thought in their perspective. And I'm seeing the rise of digital ethnography when it comes to understanding the problem space, doing qualitative interviews, one-on-ones, having people do digital diaries, people who are living and breathing in that space to kind of be at the table when you're talking about what you're going to be solving for and what you're going to be concentrating on for the week or even 2 weeks. So that's one major change I've seen from the original one, is that you just can't have everyone go off and do Google internet searches on what you're looking for. You have to have a better understanding of what's going on. I also see, and this has already been acknowledged, but it's continuing to morph, is after you go through the first 2 steps, which is knowing about your environment, getting an understanding of it, doing a deep dive, picking a target, doing ideation. When you get to the point where everyone's kind of feeling good about a solution sketch, which is, if for those who aren't familiar with design sprints, it's a 3-panel storyboard of what the experience is going to be with what you're going to be creating, what your novel idea is. Lately, what I've been seeing in the enterprise space is that people are requiring a sign-off at that point. So the sprint doesn't continue unabated for 3 or 4 or 5 days. There's a definite ending point where the stakeholders involved and other people that are interested in what's happening have a sign-off process to say, okay, where are we at with this? And since it's pretty Spartan, it's just almost drawings and sketches, maybe a little bit of digital. it opens up the table for questions across the board, clarifying intent. Are we targeting and going after the thing we originally set out to do, and that why we're funding this effort in the first place? But once those sign-offs happen, then everything downstream that happens with prototyping builds, storyboarding, user interviews, they all have I would say an informed level of consent that was implied at the very beginning of a design sprint, but now it's pretty much like set in stone that they make some course corrections, they pivot maybe a little bit, but after that kind of approval process, midway through a traditional or virtual design sprint, teams are moving quickly, even from the time they test, with development getting ready to figure out how they're going to take the assets, take the results, and integrate them into their process if the testing turns out to be successful in that regard. So those are the two major ones that I've seen.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to encourage our audience members to jump in at any point. You can use the chat to type in a question, then we can bring you on to ask it, whether that's about methodologies or maybe even a specific challenge that you're facing now and how you might go about it. In the meantime, Robert, what are some of the most common obstacles or objections you see in organizations to working like this? Because I know there still is what you might call a traditional approach, and I'm still seeing that within organizations in some places where you maybe have a big budget and a big idea and a big timeline and a big team, and you put something into the marketplace and find out the hard way that maybe it's not what the marketplace needs.
Well, in terms of evangelizing the process within an organization, the biggest mistake that I see people do time and time again is they think the process itself is the magic sauce. And I'm guilty of this when I first started. I thought this was amazing because I had been siloed in enterprise organizations forever in either design or development. And I thought this is something that could really carry everybody forward on the same page. But the process isn't what kind of dictates everything. It's the culture. So when you talk about something like this, basically making the case for something improving the company in some aspect, whether it's revenue or market share or even user satisfaction, there's always a measurement that goes along with that. And I try to encourage people to not talk about the process, but talk about the outcomes. Talk about what you think you can influence or move the needle on. Something that may matter to sales or to customer service or to marketing or to leadership. There's a whole bunch of different departments and people you work with. You have to kind of understand and walk a mile in their shoes before you just kind of put something on the table saying, if we do this, we can all succeed. They need to know, what's in it for them, and you have to kind of do it on their terms. So in terms of the process kind of being put on the table as a way to upsell it to people in an organization, I always say lead with outcomes. Have the conversation saying, I think we could probably increase the conversion rate on these pages when it comes to buying tickets by about 10 to 15%. And then you just don't get into the how. If people are interested and they say, well, tell me more, what do you think we could do? Then you may kind of trickle in the process. But I see too many people leading with design sprints. They're fantastic, but it doesn't work like that. You need to really emphasize not with your user per se, but actually with the people that you work with and the people that you would ultimately want to partner with to make things better for everybody involved.
Is working like this still the exception, or is it becoming the rule?
I see it slowly moving to a more collaborative environment, and there's a number of factors involved with that. Some of it is just how workplaces evolve slowly, organically over time. But I think the rise of certain an acknowledgement of how fast our collective work culture has become around what the market is demanding from companies and businesses and people, and the need to be innovative to kind of address. One of them is, and I wrote about this a couple of years ago, was the emergence of the product designer that would supplant the UX designer in terms of an actual label, meaning that there was a trend for people in UX, people in design, people in development to get closer to what business is concerned about. But how that translates is going to depend on every business. But there's more of an acknowledgement that whether you're working at Netflix or you're working at Intuit, there's a bit of synergy that has to happen between departments. Not necessarily, okay, include them on an email thread, but really understand how what the work you do impacts everybody else, and how what you can do as, say, a designer that has multiple views into different things, how you can take all of that data and all of that perspective and infuse it into your work. So you're thinking in advance, you're kind of thinking in the future on how this is going to work. So I kind of see where virtual design sprints kind of fall into this is understanding how that this is just one step in a multi-step process that involves a lot of people. So if you project out where it's going to go with multiple people, then that's probably a good place to be.
We have some questions coming in. Pablo is first question. Pablo, did you want to come on and ask your question?
I heard that you mentioned jobs to be done. I was curious to know if you know any organization using design sprints with jobs to be done and how they are using it.
I know of two organizations that are, but I'm not the person to ask, unfortunately, because there's someone who's very dialed into that over at Mural. His name's Jim Kalbach, who's just written a book on jobs to be done, and since he's working with digital whiteboards and has a really good foot in the door with a lot of different enterprise companies. Of the conversations I've had with him, I know that there are a couple of them that are, but I can't tell you off the top of my head with certainty. From what I recall, I know that that there's different departments within Microsoft that do jobs to be done, but they use Miro instead. So they kind of have an approach where they do a lot of kind of walkthroughs with users. I'm probably don't have a good authority on that to tell you where to go.
Okay.
But I would search out Jim Kalbach. It's like CALBACH, I believe. You look him up on LinkedIn, and he's part of the Mural network. He could definitely give you some insight, and he probably has already posted about it.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Thanks, Pablo. Next question is from Andreas. Andreas, are you outdoors or is that a background? I'm feeling more relaxed just looking at that.
Thank you. Well, it's actually background, but my house is close to the forest. So I said, instead of the boring office, I'll show you a little bit of the forest. So I hope you can enjoy it. Well, Rob, the question is, if I correctly understood you, you used the term prototyping, and I'm not quite familiar with that term. Can you elaborate? Is there any difference to prototyping, or is it just the same and a different word?
Yeah, so I can remark on that. It's so prototyping as opposed to prototyping. It's a set of tools and techniques that's originally was designed to help validate any idea for a new product that you have in an objective way. So this was originated by Alberto Savoia. His last name is spelled Savoia. And back in 2000, he published something called Prototyping for Innovators when he was at Google. It basically was renamed as the Prototyping Manifesto. And the whole idea is that you basically, through experiments, through testing, through fast, cheap, and believable exercises, you can test to see if what you are thinking about will work in the market before you even build it. I think the phrase that he uses is that you want people to buy it before you build it. And many people in the innovation space want to build it, then see if people want it, like the value proposition first, like do an MVP. And so he's been working on it for 10 years. The book he has is called The Right It. You can, if you look up his name, you'll see plenty of videos on YouTube around what he's been doing with it lately. But that's where I would go to kind of understand what it's all about. It's essentially, it's curbing risk very early. It's being able to just really test for desirability in the marketplace from what you're doing. And I recommend it to people, especially if they're not sure where their product or service is going to go. Solopreneurs it's perfect for them because for people that don't have the time and the budget to kind of execute against this, I find it to be a really good recipe to learn how to do it, understand what skills you need to kind of execute against it, but it saves you a ton of time to see whether or not there's a signal in your audience to say, oh yeah, we kind of like this, without getting into their opinions, just what they do. Do they give you any skin in the game? Do they give you money, a phone number, an email address, a contract, something that would indicate that they're giving you some intention commerce around what you're presenting? And if you do enough of that, those kind of experiments, you'll kind of develop an understanding of where your idea may go and where you would need to pivot. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much on figuring that out. I will certainly investigate on that one.
Okay, great. And we also, I and a couple other people have a couple of communities related to prototyping. If you go on LinkedIn, if you look under me with Robert Skrobe, there's going to be a list of the different places that I have, but one of them is called Prototyping Professionals. And that's a place where I post some of the experiments that I do. Others post some podcast work. Exponentially, the company out of Australia, has a Slack channel. And Exponentially is spelled EXPONENTIALLY. And it's being headed up by Leslie Barry, just as it sounds, BARRY. And he's worked with Alberto longer than I have. But that Slack channel is like an extension of the book where it offers a class. It also allows you to practice your XYZ hypothesis or your experiments. So yeah, there's plenty of places you can go if you're curious.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Andreas. And for anyone who hasn't read Alberto's book, it's very much worth your time. I read it recently. It's a great book. It'll change the way you see things. Robert, speaking of prototyping, for those who aren't familiar with it, do you have a real world example of a prototyping experiment or set of experiments or engagement that you were involved with and the results you got out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I can do both, like just general examples of prototypes, but I can also go into one that I did for myself. So recently, at the beginning of the year, I did one where I had an idea around pairing up people who did digital whiteboards with people who are looking for odd jobs. Right now, most of the major whiteboarding companies have an arm to their business where they pay consultants to do the work the work for enterprise companies. They're subcontracted to do a certain amount of work for them, and then that whiteboarding company benefits by having the contract and having the relationship. Well, there's also directors and functional managers that are looking to get something ready for a trade show, or they want to take something that they have and they want to put it into a whiteboarding form, but they don't have the finances to hire somebody at $250 an hour. There's also small businesses that know this stuff very well that are looking to find clients for these one-off ones to show that what they can do and also get future work. So I created something called Miro Masters. It was a one-page fake door prototype where it would ask for a person's email address and ask what they were looking for out of a designer. And basically, it was kind of like a fake door and a Mechanical Turk, or somebody that was doing the mechanics on the back end. I would literally make introductions on LinkedIn to both the person looking for the work and the person that was the talent that would help them. The caveat being is that I knew who the talent was and I knew about their work. So it was a bit of a referral service that I was doing. And the test got past the clearance. Basically, I got past my initial percentage of who I thought would engage it or send an email address. And the only reason why I didn't move forward with it because I had other things in the pot that I was cooking and I didn't want to spread myself too thin. But that's an example of something I personally did at the beginning of the year that actually was surprisingly was pretty popular for another month before I had to kind of completely take it offline. If you're looking for something that is different from what I do and you want an example of another prototype, the one I refer to sometimes is called a one-night stand. So when the founders of Airbnb first got started, they wanted to sacrifice their apartment for one night. They created a simple website where they offered an alternative to hotel rooms. It was basically an air mattress, a simple breakfast for $80 a night. And at the time, it was a bargain in San Francisco. So after a little bit, much to their surprise, 3 people signed up very quickly and they collected over $240 in their first night. So they continued to do this, expanded it out, and now everyone knows what Airbnb is. It's all about valued at over 10 billion, I think now. But that's an example of kind of testing the market to see if they'll actually do something that you think they'll do. Will they actually put skin in the game, some money in, to kind of, or some sort of commerce? The strength of it being money being the strongest evidence, whereas email may be the weakest evidence. But no matter what it is the market giving you an indication that there could be some monetization opportunities, some approach to kind of going about kind of exploring where a product or service can go?
When you've heard enough of those stories, and there are quite a few in Alberto's book, right? You start to wonder why anyone would start a full-blown business at all anymore, right? When you learn, once you've seen these techniques, of course, that's a little harder with if you're in the retail business, for example, but there's still possibilities there.
I think David Bland said it best yesterday when I was talking to him on Clubhouse, and he said, I asked him what the three most, and I'm going to be paraphrasing here because I don't quite remember what I had written, or what I had written down when he talked to him. But there are three most frequent behaviors of effective experimenters, people that would take the prototyping process and use it effectively, or any kind of experimentation. And from what I remember from that conversation, he said first is that you have to make sure you maintain your focus and not to get too distracted on some variations of what you originally had gone into. Second is that you need to kind of be focused on the overall goal, but know when you need to kind of focused on where you want to go with things, especially if you're a founder, but know when you have to give things up, when the experiment should end, so that you don't get too emotionally invested into it. The third one I can't remember, but I made a post on it, and I'm almost wanting to quote the post so I can sound very authoritative. But in a nutshell, what David was saying was you have to make sure that you keep kind of a distance from the experiments you're doing, and keep the data, and know that the data is telling you a story. It may not be the full story, but the other side of the story is where you have conversations with the people that you want to serve to find out what they think about certain things. The more fact-based, the better. That way you can kind of marry the two and start to see patterns, start to see where things go. And just know that it's not just one or two experiments that you do as like kind of just a one-off, but a portfolio of micro experiments that could lead you in a certain direction. As long as you're intrinsically motivated to do those experiments and you really want to see what the end result is, and there's something that drives you to do it, those are usually the best kind of ingredients for micro experimentation and learning how the market is going to react to your ideas.
Perhaps you can share that exact quote online in the innovators community, where I hope we can continue this conversation if anyone has any additional questions as well, because once it's happened again, our 30 minutes felt like 10, and we're already at the end. Robert, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and sharing your experiences with us. Really great session. And thanks to everyone else for joining as well.
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you very much.
We'll see you online.
All right. Bye, everybody. Take care.